Well, hello, it's Miss Gina. I was just about to read chapter 8 of Mysterious Shrinking House. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I was wondering what my keys would open in the doppel in. I don't know. So let's begin. And again, you're at story time with Miss Gina. It's January 23rd, 2024. Whoop, not phonics anymore. Let's jump right in. Escape! Dear lady, how can you think of it? The once young Augustus Doppel wrung his long, pale hands. Only think of the dangers. Field mice as large as lions, mosquitoes as big as blackbirds, and the traffic, such a rushing and roaring as goes by the museum. Why, at the front of the door, noise itself would knock you flat. At the front door itself, excuse me, we're back up, rewind, repeat that. Why, at the front door, the noise itself would knock you flat. And think of the families, your old friends. You are but a little over 5 inches tall. That's short. Thought 5 feet was short. But 5 inches, yeah, that's tiny. In your world, dear lady, could they converse with you happily? Or would they not, despite their affection, make a curiosity of you? How could they not do so? You would be condemned to a dollhouse life in any case. Here at least you will have companions in misfortune, and though our life is somewhat restricted, our needs are all supplied after a fashion. Well, said Mrs. Bright, blinking, I didn't mean only Mindy and myself, and I did mean to be unshrunk first. They want to be unshrunk. They're not going away. Still tiny. I shall never leave, said Mrs. Umstott in a tragic tone. The world out there is not my world, not with Mama and Papa gone. I should be utterly alone. A pretty woman like yourself, Mrs. Bright wondered whether she ought to be ashamed, but she felt a positive joy rising at the thought of disconcerting these placid, pasty people. Why, a month of orange juice and steak, and you could find a husband still. Mr. Goff flicked a furtive glance in Mrs. Umstott's direction, then sighed heavily and ate another piece of toast. And you, Mr. Goff, Mrs. Bright said wickedly, you must have cut a dashing figure as a young man. I dare say you could again with a little exercise and a lot less toast. Mr. Goff's nose and cheeks burned, if possible, more brightly. Used to run cross-country races, he said. He looked sadly at his waistline. Me too. No, I didn't used to run. No, wasn't me. Mr. Goff's nose, they looked more bright. I think they did look more bright. Vanity, Mrs. Bright, vanity, sorrowed the Reverend Edwards. No, here we are safe. It is an evil world out there. Bright colors and frenzy of speed, savage music, loud people with rough and sunburned skins. Meaning no offense, Mr. Doppel interjected hastily. Indeed, on Mrs. Bright's cheeks, the rosy brown is truly the kiss of the sun. Mwah! The sun kissed her cheeks. His little bow was both shy and courtly. Rough and sunburned, maintained the Reverend, raising his voice to lament. rough and sunburned. And if to reprove a listening world, when I was a young man, ladies covered themselves from the sun. Nothing is as it was. And a good thing too, Mrs. Bright retorted acidly. Think how cramped our lives were. And of course, full-size people sound loud and look awful when you're shrunk to 6 inches. They must look simply full of pits and wrinkles. I shouldn't wonder, like the giant Brobdingnagian girl Glumdalclick in Gulliver's Travels. Oh, my dear. Oh, my dears. Can't you see what has happened? You may be glad to be shut apart from noise and children and change and sit here complaining at a safe distance. But you are only ghosts. Her voice rose in agitation. Oh, do try to be alive. Want to get back out into the confusion? I know. Perhaps we cannot, but want to. Oh, I refuse to be a ghost. She stamped an angry little foot. Hurrah! Samantha applauded from the doorway. And Mindy slipped in to tuck her hand in Mrs. Bright's. The Crumps opened the sack of supplies from the Buckle House with exclamations of delight. If out of all of this, even one thing were good, it would be a treat all around, Jack explained. Oh, let it be the pork and beans. He had moaned prayerfully. He's praying for pork and beans. I have never done that. It was only with great effort that he managed to tear himself away from Samantha when Samantha reminded him that he had first watch at the lookout post in the attic, now that the professor was up and stirring. Once Kurtz ate and swept and puttered a while with his machine, he went down into the village, usually returning just before time to open up Lilliput, USA at noon. A bell pull in the attic tower room of the inn, which overlooked the whole of the museum room, rang a small bell in the keeping room. We'll pretend like that's it, the bell. As the laundry was familiarly called. I'm going to back up and show you this picture. It's a new picture. He's praying over the pork and beans. He wants them to still be good. They've been in there a long time. I don't think I'd want them. No. A single ring repeated at short intervals meant he's up and about. A double ring meant all clear. And a continuing ring, as Mrs. Morrissey put it, meant freeze or run for your life. Here's a run for your life bell. Run for your life or freeze. Oh, good times. He started dusting over on Grace Street. While Kurtz worked on the houses, everyone remained safely hidden in the keeping room. When Jack gives the all clear, I generally head out for the garden, Samantha said. Miss Umstott spoke graciously, and I always take a turn along out Little High Street and down Grace Street, Mrs. Bright. Perhaps this morning you would care to accompany me? Indeed. I would enjoy seeing the Buckle House, as you call it, again after all these years. Again? Oh, yes, indeed, said Mr. Doppel. Your house, dear lady, makes you a charter member of our little family. In the old days, it toured with us in the professor's wagon, Professor Lilliput and his marvelous museum of miniatures. But before we settled in here, we put in at the professor's farm for repairs and such. Your house was left behind in the confusion and stayed there till I found it. Mindy forgot for the moment the hunger that had begun to make her stomach rumble. And that old sign, I found part of the sign that must have been on the wagon. How about that? It felt very exhilarating to have something cleared up, even if it were only the small mystery of Professor L.I. and Marvelous M. Mrs. Bright had caught at something else Mr. Doppel said. What confusion? She asked. Mrs. Morrissey shook jelly-like with amusement at the recollection. Dear me, it wasn't half hectic. Turned out, wasn't his farm at all. The professor was nothing but a squatter, and when the rightful owner turned up after the Great War, that was why the sheriff came and turned us off the place. Just as well, I say. Stuck out in that barn, we scarce had a thing to eat but greens. And if you don't think that's a strain, well, what do you eat here besides toast? Asked Mindy, after Samantha had warned of the professor's waking and Jack Crump had put out the fire in the stove that had once served as a laundry boiler and gone off. She eyed the last two pieces of cold toast. Oh, cake and breads, rolls, cookies, and greens, of course, answered Nurse Morrissey, who looked as if her particular passion was cake. I like cake. Once upon a time, we tried to make Boston baked beans with columbine seeds and bacon fat. But real pork and beans. She eyed the can hungrily. As she explained, the meat in the professor's scraps is too coarse, you see, and he always cooks everything dribble of broth out of it. So we've had not a morsel of meat for an age. There's milk, though, thanks to Samantha. Samantha grinned. I let the milk can down in the firewood basket and go down by rope ladder, then out of my own private mouse hole. As soon as the milkman's gone, I siphon off what we need. The silent Sibylla had poured two steaming cups of coffee and passed the toast to the newcomers, burst out unexpectedly with. And she pinches the flour and salt and sugar and coffee we grind up for ourselves. I asked you fine folks, what are we going to do when Mrs. Samantha ain't spry enough to wind the basket up and down and zip up and down that old rope ladder no more? No more staples, no more milk, no more wood, and no more greens neither. She shook her head violently. Much moved by the prospect of an empty larder, that's where they store their food, I'm suspecting, it was apparent that Samantha's old dears had not thought so far ahead. Now, looking from Samantha to Mindy, it was as if they suddenly felt their lost years very cruelly. And they were afraid, would Samantha have even 5 years of ladder climbing in her? Take heart, dear friends. Do you not see? The Reverend spoke unctuously, rubbing his hands together, beaming at Mindy. Clearly, he was thinking that she was more than enough ladder climbing years to take care of them all. We have been provided for, he said. So we have just gone from chapter 8 into chapter 9. So, when life gives you lemons, 9 of them to be exact. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What do? Make lemonade and read a good book. That's a good thing to do. So read more in 2024 and grow your brains. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.